Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted deepest wisdom or healing, then do we have the Sacred Science Show for you. Today I'll be talking with Nick Polizzi, founder of The Sacred Science, documentary filmmaker of The Tapping Solution, and the author of a brilliant journey into plant and indigenous wisdom, The Sacred Science. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about an ancient healing path for the modern world. That, plus we'll talk about grandpa and enlightened eggs, Inca Cola and fire ants, Park Slope apartments, 6 accidents in 1 year, including 1 boat, coffee and sharp cheese, pendulums and roller coaster rides, boom boxes and old oak trees, and what in the world a bulldog named Oscar has to do with anything. Gotcha. So welcome to the show, Nick. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready to shine.
Woohoo! Did I mention we're going to have some fun here today, my brother?
You know, I have a feeling that that's going to happen.
Excellent, excellent. So before we dive right into things, I can't believe I'm going to ask this right out the gate, but how did you meet your wife, Michelle?
Ooh. I met Michelle in design school. We went to a little design school in Albany, New York that no one probably has ever heard of, called the College of St. Rose. I transferred there from business school. I went to SUNY Albany, State University of Albany, at New York, and that was cool. But I realized that I wanted to become a designer, get a little more artsy, and then right down the road there was this design school. So my parents were kind of like, "Oh, okay, I guess you're gonna go to this weird school." And I went, and there she was. Second or third day I was there. She didn't like me very much at first. She didn't really like my whole style at first. And honestly, it wasn't until about 10 years later that we actually got together.
Wow.
We became friends. Don't get me wrong.
Very nice.
It was a long game. Like, we were friends, and we both moved to New York City at the same time. We graduated together, and but after about 10 years, we finally realized that there might be something there.
Did you know you were playing a long game?
You know something? I got to be candid with you. Yes, I knew I was playing the long game. I didn't know if the long game would work.
Right.
And it wasn't like I was holding out for her. I had a couple long-term relationships in the meantime, but I think that yes, there was always this feeling of there was more than a friendship there for me. For her, she would tell you that that wasn't the case. That was really towards the very end that she realized that there was something more. For me, I was always slightly pining after her a little bit. And maybe that's exactly how she liked it.
And it worked. Woohoo! Going from your wife, Michelle, then, can you tell us, going back in time to going to church on Sundays as a child?
So I grew up in a very Christian family, Italian on one side, Italian Christian and Irish Catholic. Yep. But my parents. So yeah, going to church was a big deal growing up. And I have to say, when I started out going to church, my parents were really into it. And then somehow toward 9 or 10 years old, I think we all started kind of, getting over it, probably because my sister and I put up such a fight, or just, did little things to make it very inconvenient for my parents to try to get us to go to church. That, coupled with the fact that my father and I both started liking to watch the New York Jets on Sunday, which is a football team, that kind of started taking away from the whole experience, and it turned into sort of this obligation that we kind of held our nose through to get to football.
And it sounds like you weren't seeing at the time, there were some challenges that you had with traditional religion.
I did have challenges with, so... Okay, you said that we could go anywhere, and we'll just go. We'll go right into it.
Let's go for it.
When I was little, I started seeing things in the dark before I went to bed. Mm-hmm. And it started off by being like little bits of light, and then I started being able to control the light a little bit. Your parents put you to bed early, too early. Maybe it's like 7 o'clock, and I don't go to sleep till 8. Well, in the dark, you're not just you're doing things. You're trying to figure out hopefully you're not doing terrible things, and but you're you're in the dark, you're looking at color, you're trying to understand what this is all about, and you don't drift off to sleep very fast, and you start noticing that there's more there than just, empty black space. And so I started playing with those things, and that kind of opened up a Pandora's box for me, whether or not that was something that I willed to happen or something that was sort of a part of my birthright that maybe some people don't have. I don't know. To this day, I don't know. But they couldn't explain it in church, and my parents couldn't explain it in any other way than to sort of talk about these fire and brimstone type situations. Either it's an angelic thing or it's something to stay away from. But more so than anything, it's just largely ignored, which I think is a lot of the work that I do, is going into realms that are largely ignored by science and mainstream religion.
It's fascinating. I see several early parallels. First off, then at 14, you've got a sister who you see reading about Wicca.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly something was going on she wasn't sharing there.
Yeah, that was interesting because, okay, so I say right now that I had these misgivings about Christianity, but at the same time, Christianity does a really good job of making you fear anything outside of it. So there was always that feeling. And I'm not, listen, if people who are listening, Christian, Catholic, Muslim, I respect your religion. I respect it. And at the core of all these religions, I do believe is a very similar strand of wisdom and consciousness. But I will say that my experience is there's fire and brimstone, there is fear, and there's always this feeling of needing to repent and be ashamed of behaving in certain ways that aren't in accordance to this doctrine that was largely whose origins is misgiving, his origins is mysterious. I don't think that it's something that we necessarily know as fact, but we as Christians behave as though, even though we might have some doubt, there is no room for doubt, and blind faith is where it's at. So for me to see my sister looking at her Wicca book and, sitting over in the corner of our playroom, with this kind of, makeshift shrine set up when she was like 12 and I was 10 or something to that effect, was concerning to me. I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, listen, like, you're not allowed. That's like you're venturing off the reservation. You're like, this is not what we're supposed to be doing. But then, as I sort of became more and more, disenfranchised with church, which is like, maybe a year later, then I started kind of wandering over there and like poking at it. And some of my parents gave her the space. To their credit, they gave her the room to have that shrine. They knew it was there. Your parents know everything about you, so they knew there was a Wicca thing going on upstairs in our playroom. So I went over there and started opening up the books and started seeing imagery and reading little bits of text that really started to describe what I was experiencing. And I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. This is real. This is me. This is the reality that I'm experiencing that I can't talk about in church, and I can't talk about in front of my grandparents because they'll rush me off to get blessed and go to confession, kind of a thing. Not that crazy, but sort of that same sentiment. But it was really interesting to see how questions that are not addressed in mainstream religion are very much addressed, if not at the core of a lot of these pagan religions.
What's interesting, if we fast forward, you ended up in the modern workforce, so to speak. And then in 2002, and I know nothing about these, but when you mentioned moving light in your mind and with your eye, all of a sudden you're having ocular, which makes me think of light, migraines in 2002, as if it's coming back around and knocking on your door.
Yeah, it's very true. And I thank you for drawing that correlation. It's something that I've thought about quite a bit myself. In 2002, 2003, I started having these terrible migraine headaches. Now, a lot of things transpired between 13 and 22, 23, including, I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but I did get hit by lightning when I was 16 years old. And
we were going to double back around. So that's not, that had something to do with what Run DMC boom boxes and, oh crap, what do I do now? Let's fix this.
Well, you know what? So that's a little aside. We'll come back to that. That definitely changed the way that the nature of these visions that I was having and made them much more intense.
All right, let's go there first since we're already there. Then we'll fast forward. So what happened in 16 that had shaman later on dropping their jaws?
Oh man. So I was 16 years old. I had just broken up with my girlfriend at the time. It was raining out. And if you live in Connecticut, you are very familiar with, and you're from Massachusetts, I'm sure you probably had the same. These summertime thunderstorms are just incredible things. Like, they're just amazing. It's just, you find like 2 or 3 days of humidity is just building up to this crescendo. Like, there's going to be a thunderstorm and it's going to just break the whole thing apart. So that had happened for the 2 or 3 days prior, and I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I won't mention her name, although she probably wouldn't mind. And then I thought it would be a good idea, as I was sitting there kind of brooding in my house, to wander outside into what was developing into quite the thunderstorm. And so maybe it was like a Say Anything type of moment. You've probably seen Say Anything, where Cusack does that with the boombox. It wasn't really like that, but I kind of think about it now. It's sort of very weird.
Well, I was wondering about the boombox and the rain, and my assumption was he must have left it in the garage.
So that's the thing. The boombox was in the garage. I had the boombox on in the garage, playing out from the open garage door, and I was standing there in the rain. I can't remember the particular track I was listening to, but it might have been something very I don't even know the right way to put it, but a female vocalist singing very emotionally about something having to do with love. I'm sure it was something, probably Cranberries or something like that at that point. It was like, early 90s or mid 90s.
Well, it's a mixtape from your ex-girlfriend. It's sort of like Adam Sandler on the boat after he's leaving in Hawaii on 51st dates going, why? Why do I have it?
So true. And it was the music was all so like emo. It was so, everything that we ever sent to each other was just this like, anyway, so I'm sure it was something obnoxiously, over the top. And I'm sitting there standing in the rain, and there's this big oak tree next to our driveway, and I'm standing there. I'm not even sure what I'm doing. I'm probably just standing there, getting drenched and just being, feeling like that's the appropriate way to kind of, sort of be experiencing this reality at that particular moment in time. And the thunderclouds are rolling in, and we are at a pretty high point. You can see where this is going. I've already kind of spoiled the punchline, so I can tell you these parts. And the thunder gets more, it's less spaced out from the flashes of lightning, and then the completely unexpected happens. Everything flashes bright white, and there's a big boom. Actually, no, it was more of like a bang, not like a boom. It was more like a bang, which is a different, there's a distinction there. Like a boom sort of feels like what you'd think it would sound like, kind of like this Zeus kind of boom. This is more of like a bang, like watching, I don't know if you've ever seen a video of a transformer exploding.
I had one blow next to me, so yes.
It's just like, it's more of a bang. It's like, it's almost like a cannon, like a gunshot almost in a way. And then everything goes white, and I'm out for I'm not sure how long, and then everything comes. Then I come back to, and I'm laying there on my driveway, in the midst of a bunch of pieces of wood and leaves, and I stood up, and I think the funny thing is my first thought was, I need to get back inside and pretend this never happened, because you mentioned before, I had gotten in 6 car accidents that year already. 5 car accidents, 1 boat accident, to be fair. And so I was like, I don't need any more negative publicity. I don't need any more negative press around me. This doesn't need to happen around me. So I ran inside. I think I probably first noticed that half of the oak tree was blown off. And I'm like, I don't need this around. So I ran inside, and I probably took a shower, and I never said a word about it to anybody. My parents came home. They were like, what? Oh my God, this is crazy. Lightning struck in our yard. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. It did. I never wanted to admit it, because I just didn't want to, at that point in my life, be attached to anything substantial. So, but that did change the nature of the visions at night. That did change the nature of how things were manifesting for me.
How were they manifest? Because at this point already, the veil's been pierced. You're no longer seeing the world as the quote reality, the bread and butter reality that others are subscribing to around you.
Mm-hmm. I've never talked about this before. I didn't even put it in the book because I thought it might distract from the book, but I'll tell you now about what happened. So like we were saying before, it used to be playing with color. It was more of I don't want to say 2-dimensional thing, but it was, let's just call it Atari. Like it's like more of an Atari type situation where it's like colors, there's squares, blue squares, purple circles, green triangles, green hexagons. Like it used to actually manifest, and then red always used to come in these like little speckles, these little dots, almost like little hot tamales, like those little hot tamales we used to eat. And I could play with them. I can make them come. I can make them go. I can make them do different things, go into patterns. But like I said, very 2-dimensional. On like a dark, like a black canvas kind of a thing, the darkness of my room or behind my eyelids. And then at some point it shifted a little bit, and that was like before the lightning strike, and I could start seeing little types of stuff that was kind of floating in the background, and that looks more like a lava lamp type stuff, where there's like big globs of things that are hard to make out in sort of like a liquid behind these. So you have the two-dimensional thing, and you have this like lava lamp type thing that's poorly lit, so you could barely make out that there's even anything back there, but there are these kind of like objects, these masses starting to float around that definitely don't seem as two-dimensional. They seem like they're more three-dimensional. Once I got hit by lightning, it went from that to something completely different. It went from those two types of visions at night to it would start off as sort of a little thing that looked kind of like something organic that was, far away in the darkness, and then it would just, everything would kind of unfold before me, like every night, like a Pandora's box, and then I would just be looking at very real faces, shapes, animals, places, things that were sort of covering every square inch of that space. It wasn't like there was necessarily like negative space around them so much. Whereas as it was kind of like a tapestry, a moving tapestry of different things. And a lot of times it wasn't so friendly looking. The things I was seeing weren't so nice, And so at first it was really, really disturbing. Right afterwards, it was really disturbing. And I remember like I started not being able to sleep very well. And a couple times I pulled my mom aside, and I was like, "Mom, I got to tell you about something that's happening." I didn't talk about the lightning thing, but I did say, I'm starting to see things in the dark and I don't know what they are. And she, I think the first two things are, and I don't want to throw her under the bus here, but I think the first two concerns were, one, from the scientific side, that I was becoming schizophrenic, or there was something like that. And from the religious side, it was that I was maybe starting to experience some kind of a demonic possession. So those are the two ways that was sort of looked at. And it wasn't like she said, "This is bad, you should be." She was just like, "Hey, keep talking to me about it. I want to make sure that, we're communicating about this." But then I started learning how to resolve it. Not resolve it, but I started learning how to get past it, and that if I could just not attach any fear to the bad things, or any like excitement to the cool things, that it would ultimately dissipate, and then it would just turn into a lot of times like this feeling of me being like me floating over open landscapes, and like just being like almost like an eagle-eyes view of like just floating over the globe at night. And that would just be how I'd fall asleep. All this stuff would give way, all of these faces and shapes and bodies and animals and words would give way, almost like curtains kind of parting to just the next thing, which would turn into me being in much more of a wide open, spacious landscape. And that's where I would usually fall asleep. So that was kind of how things shifted for me. And then it got even more intense. I don't know if you want me to tell you about that. It got even more intense one more time before the migraine started.
Tell us about that one. Then let's jump into the migraines. And then I want to talk about, because this is fascinating to me as someone who's gone on these journeys myself, which we'll share about, how actually then you may have been experiencing this again, thousands of miles away, going, wait a second, I've seen this before.
Yeah, totally. So so fast forward 6 years, even like 4 years, and in college. So that was when I was 16. So 4 years later, I've gotten pretty good at learning how to turn these things off. At that point, I've learned how to like actually turn off the fire hose, when it starts, and learning how to fall asleep quickly so it doesn't even ever start. So there's a variety of things I've started to do that helps me to not experience these things. Also partying in college. I mean, if you drink enough in college, then, you just, pass out, and there's none of that. So I'm at that point, and I'm living by myself at one point when I am 20 years old, and I've gotten to this place where I can get the visions to stop. And there's this new thing that's starting that's actually rather pleasant, where I am falling asleep and I'll start hearing I'll start hearing this kind of a rumbling sound of, thousands of voices, almost like you're walking through the middle of Grand Central Station. And like, it's a peaceful thing. It's very light, it's very low, and it lulls me to sleep a lot. Wow. It lulls me because it's just this really nice feeling. I'll be laying there and I'm aware, probably part of me is like, this is kind of another thing. Hopefully it's just going to be this. And at one point, and so there's a couple, it starts becoming, a very regular thing where I hear this when I'm trying to go to sleep at night. And then it gets to a point where I start hearing myself talking as well. Mm-hmm. And then it gets to a place where I start hearing these people having conversations with me. And then it gets to a place where I start hearing these people having conversations with just themselves, and I'm not even involved in it. And that's kind of a place where it's at for a few weeks. And then one night I'm about to fall asleep. And this is, again, you said I could share anything here. So I'm just telling you this is probably going to make me seem crazy to most of your listeners, but that's okay.
I'm down the rabbit hole with you. So we'll go down that C word stigma together.
All right. Thank you. And so one night I'm about to fall asleep, and it's the same thing. It starts off with, me hearing some people talking in my head. I start hearing myself talking to them, and then I just hear them start talking to themselves. And then they start hearing them saying the same few words. Like, instead of it being like this kind of a back and forth with a bunch of people, they start also chanting the same words to me. And it's like, it starts sounding almost like the sound of like a freight train, like that same kind of like over and over again, faster and faster and faster and faster, these words. It sort of sounds like, take the shortcut, 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 and then it stops. And then, because it stopped and I was actually lulling me to sleep, my mind actually kind of starts becoming a little more aware, because the thing that was just there stopped. And then I opened my eyes, and I'm laying there in the dark. I'm like, what? And then I hear right next to my head, in this crazy weird voice, take the shortcut. And I stood up, I sat up in my apartment, and I remember running around my apartment freaked out that there was something in there with me. And it wasn't. And that was when I started. So that was when I started saying, oh, this is back, but it's coming back in a different way. You got to do what you have to do to squash this completely. And so I did. And I'm not even quite sure how to describe how that squashing process happened. It's more of like a muscle. It's almost like it's like a portal inside your brain. And I actually, because out of necessity, I started learning how to do it. I would literally just make myself not experience these things. And as soon as I started experiencing anything, I'd stand up, I'd have a cup of coffee, and I'd wait till I was so tired I passed out for a couple of weeks. And then I ultimately started learning how to not have any more experiences. And that, my friend, is when the migraine started happening.
You can only push down a shaken up ink and Coke bottle for so long.
Yes.
So you get the ocular migraines, and I'm fascinated. We've had Nick on the show. We've had Nick Ortner on the show before, mm-hmm. and who is just genius when it comes to EFT tapping. And yes. What a synchronicity and a miracle that he calls you up.
Well, he and I are buddies from a while back. At that point, actually, so the ocular migraine started when I was in college. I didn't get any relief from them until at least a couple of years, 2 years later, when he and I started putting the tapping solution together. And that was happening during this. It was, we were starting to dream of the movie, and it was either right before. No, it was nope. It was right as I remember we were almost done editing it when the serious breakthrough happened. I was in the middle of one of my migraines, and he called. He always used to know when to call, and he used to piss me off. He called me right in the middle of this miserable 8-hour saga. It was 8 hours. I mean, if you've ever had an ocular migraine before, it's not a regular headache. It's not like that. If I had ever thought about migraines before I started getting them, I would have thought of them as being just like a bad headache, like you have when you drink too much wine or something like that. But it's not like that whatsoever. I mean, I'm not sure about other migraine headaches, but ocular migraine headaches feel like you've broken a bone in your brain and it's being pushed on for 8 hours. And the only thing that can help it, really slightly help it, is being in a completely dark place without any sound and with, for me, cool temperatures would make it slightly bearable. But it would get so bad, and it would affect, clearly for me, it was affecting the language center of my brain. Because at the time, I was dating a woman named Jessica, who is an amazing human being. And she would come home, and I would be in the middle of a migraine. And she'd ask me how I was doing. And the words that would come out in response would not just be like grumbled, misshapen kind of like attempts at words. They would be perfectly shapen, completely wrong words. So it would, instead of saying, I can't move, my head hurts, it would be baseball, dog, house, car, whatever it is. You know what I mean? This is like, random weird things. I mean, obviously a lot crazier than that most of the time, but my brain couldn't even formulate the right words. And I'm sure that there's a term for this, and a neurological term for this, but I couldn't actually speak. It got so bad. So he called me in the middle of a migraine headache. I was living in New York City at the time in a high rise, and he's like, I can't talk. He's like, why? I'm like, because dude, I'm like in the middle. I'm like 4 hours into a migraine. He's like, let's work on it right now. I'm like, I don't want to work on it. He's like, this is the best time to work on it. This is the best time to work on it. So we just, he's a very he is a very persuasive fellow, and he's also my best friend. So it's like very easy for him to get me to do stuff. So I'm like, all right, fine. So we start tapping on it, and long story short, within 10 minutes, it's down from misery to manageable. And along the way, I've unraveled 2 or 3 serious childhood things that happened to me that I did not think were in any way relevant to it. One was an interaction with a parent that, again, they didn't really do much wrong. They didn't do much wrong, and that's the beauty of trauma in the terrible way. But it's the beauty of trauma is it doesn't always have to be this thing where there's abuse, like serious, like where anyone watching would have called foul. It's just if you needed love and you didn't get it in a moment where you really needed it, or you were ignored when you really needed not to be in a really pivotal moment, that can cause trauma. So these things can be all over you, and you don't realize it. You're like, oh, but I was never beaten up. I was never abused. But these things where you needed something that you just didn't get, or you needed something not to happen that just happened anyway, can cause trauma. So that was kind of what unlocked this, and they never ever came back.
Woohoo!
Now I got to be honest. It was a combination of that and me doing a few dietary things that I still do to this day. And when I violate the dietary things, I do start seeing warning signs. And there are warning signs if you're prone to ocular migraines, you know what I'm talking about. There's little bits of aura that you'll start seeing, every now and again that kind of warn you a lot of the time that you're about to get one. So there are certain things that also were important. But I think that the combination of this ancient practice of Chinese medicine combined with conventional talk therapy, combined with this dietary regimen that I still am on now, I've never had another migraine again, which most people say is impossible. My neurologists, I didn't even get into that part. I have come from a long line of nurses, and so in the Danbury area, it was easy for me to get to the best top neurologist, who put me on a bunch of different types of drugs to try to get it to go away. It didn't work. And then he said he was going to have to put me on some drugs that would change my mood, which is where Nick Ortner found me struggling in my apartment, not taking drugs anymore, trying to deal with it myself. And then he brought EFT to me, and that and the diet thing helped me a lot.
One of the amazing questions that I loved that he asked is, if pain were a person, who would it be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that helps. Tell me what that did, because to me, it really helps you be able to make it more tangible so that you can do something about it. Yeah.
For me, it just took pain and made it into something more than just, so something that happened that night, I think it was night when he called me, was instead of looking at pain like this thing that is just, well, science calls it pain. That must be what it is. And I'm just experiencing a lot of it right now. That's what I thought of as what I was experiencing. Whereas with tapping, it started teasing the pain out into these different strands that all kind of were woven together. And in my case, were woven together in a knot that were kind of ripping at each, in different directions, kind of making this pain happen. Well, something that I think tapping does that's really important is it turns the pain into something much more. It untangles. It sort of it gives name to a lot of the underpinnings of pain. It gives language to these different energetics that are going on inside of you that make up that pain. Like I started realizing in the middle of that tapping session, I'm like, wait, so it's not really pain. It's this sensation, that sensation, this sensation, and a little bit of cold I'm feeling. That is just kind of all coming together right now. That's just making this thing unbearable. But if I look at them as these 5 different sensations, they're not really unbearable anymore. That's just information. I mean, slightly, it's still uncomfortable, but it's not agonizing pain. I'm starting to tease them out into the different threads. And then one of the threads happened to be a family member. So when he said, if you could put if this pain was a person, who would it be? It just helped even more clearly give reality to that little bit of pain that I was experiencing. And by doing that gave me power over it. And once I had language for it and had power over it, I was like, oh, well, I can very proactively start addressing this pain. So, or at least addressing this facet of what I'm going through right now. And then, so just doing that made it very easy for me to at least compartmentalize, figure out what was going on, and then also start kind of grieving over that experience and start turning that from a place of stress, anxiety, and disorientation to a place of grieving, processing, mourning almost a little bit of that thing that happened. And that's a much different energy than this feeling of disorientation, this feeling of anxiety, stress, and being unsafe.
Well, it kind of dovetails into where we're going to be going here. You were able at that point to lean into it rather than try to push it away, and what you resist certainly persists and left you probably in a fetal position. But now you actually had an identification. There's something I can do, and if I'm willing to go through it, which is actually shamanic initiation, if I'm willing to go through it, it doesn't have that grip on me anymore. That's right.
Well, so this was my entree into shamanism. It's I'm sure Nick Nick probably would not want me to say that on there, but listen, EFT shamanism, exact same thing. If you've had EFT, you basically drank ayahuasca. That's all you need to say. But this is a wrap. This is no, but it wasn't on. It was my poor portal or entryway into shamanism because EFT started this inquiry, this self-inquiry, and I was like, oh. So wait, all this pain, this chronic illness that I've been suffering through for the last 4 years, it came down to these parts of myself that I just hadn't explored yet. What else is there? What else is there? So I started looking at it with tapping or with fasting or with starting to work with different sacred plants. I started looking at it like this is me putting my little spelunking helmet on, turning my light on, and then lowering myself down into the well, of who I was, and just kind of starting to look around down there, see what else is going on. And even now, it's happening all the time. I do it like on a weekly basis. It's like this self-inquiry. I mean, you're never gonna get to the bottom of who you are. It's just not going to happen in this lifetime. And that's part of the fun if you look at it that way. So I started working with different traditions and trying to figure out what else I could do to kind of get that look into my periphery, the things that I could tell were still there, kind of clawing at me, holding me back. And while we were filming the tapping solution, and while I was filming, when I was working on a subsequent film, I started asking experts that we were working with who their teachers were, because I wanted, and what practices they use. So if I'm sitting there with Jack Canfield, or sitting there with, any one of these people from movies like The Secret, Bob Proctor was he gave one of the most epic responses. But I've got to ask him. We've had Bob on too. What did Bob tell you when he asked him? I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that because it's so very personal. But essentially, these guys this is sort of, well, Bob did something that day, and I could do a segue here, but it was ridiculous. And this is what happens when you start talking to these older guys who've been kind of working with a bunch of different traditions. We're sitting there. We're in Aspen. You mentioned that before that you wanted to move to Aspen, or you were going to move to Aspen. We're interviewing Bob Proctor in Aspen, and after the interview's over, one of us asked, might have been me, a question that we just sort of started asking everybody, which is, who is your teacher? And, can you give us a bit of wisdom from that teacher? And he's like, oh, my teacher, Bob. He's like, my teacher, you wouldn't know him. He's not somebody who sits in front of cameras and talks like I do. He's somebody who lives far away in a remote part of the world, and you wouldn't know him, but I'll give you some wisdom. He's like, most of us think we're our names. He's like, you guys back there. He's like, who do you think you are? You think you're Nick? You think I'm Bob? There's so much more to us than our names, and it seems like a simple thing. It's alarmingly simple, but most of us think that we're our names, and if not, maybe the next layer is we think that we're our names and we're our professions. That's the first answer you'll get when you ask somebody who they are. He's like, but this is all sort of the first layer of something that is alarmingly more infinite and more complex. And when you tap into that and you start realizing that simple thing is going to change your entire reality. So that little bit of a wisdom drop was what we started kind of getting after these interviews. And during these post interviews, interview questions, I started hearing about shamanism, started hearing about native traditions, started hearing about these ancient ways that have been forgotten about largely. And for me, I was really curious. It struck a chord with me. I don't know, I was on set with a few other friends when we were making these movies, and for them it was like, oh, this is really cool, but hey, let's just keep on, getting this movie done and blah blah blah. For me, it was more like, oh, cool, this is where I'm going next. It spoke to a lot of these guys would talk about things that I could relate to. I had seen things like from a lot of the other filmmakers that are the partners that I had teamed up with. This all sounded really interesting, but it wasn't something that they necessarily had firsthand experience with. I had seen visions, and I had things that I had to squash down. I had many out of body experiences. I was a believer already, so it wasn't like I needed much selling. Once they told me that this guy could do that, I knew he could. I knew that if I traveled out to the Sonora Desert and found that one guy, then I had already experienced a peek at it. So I knew that there must be a lot more. So for me, shamanism was where I wanted to go next. And it all really started from EFT, and making that first film. And then the film after that. And then the following film was The Sacred Science, which was when we brought 8 patients from around the world who were really sick down to the middle of the Amazon.
Which to me is crazy, brilliant, beautiful, and in the most beautiful way, crazy again.
It's so true. Nobody understood. Everyone thought I was nuts. Everyone thought it was a bad idea.
It was a brilliant idea. It was life transformative, I believe, for everybody involved. And I think it was way more than you or any participant, not the shaman, they had a good idea, I'm guessing, but had any idea what you were getting into.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I even looking back on it now, I don't really quite understand. I mean, beyond the fact that there's just severe risk to these patients and to us, there's also a substantial financial commitment. This was like, a lot of money to kind of, put on something that was just like, everyone's like, what are you talking about? These people, they're so sick. I mean, yeah, sure they want to go, but this is crazy. Like, you can make movies with talking heads. Like you could just go interview 30 experts and put them in a row and make another secret. And no one's going to die. It's just like, this is not a good, this is not a good use of your resources. And I didn't care. It's just crazy. Like at that point, I'm like, you know what? Doesn't matter. I'm doing it. You can't stop me. I'm doing it. We're doing this. So we put out, we had the luxury of having access to the tapping solution community, and also the Simply Raw, Reversing Diabetes in 30 Days was a movie that I was a part of, and I had access to those folks. So we put a little call out for applications to those 2 communities one day, saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. You've seen the other 2 movies, we've made. Well, this is kind of the same, but completely different, bizarre, and very dangerous. But if you're desperate, if you've been failed by modern medicine and you're willing, or if you're looking for an answer, send in your application, tell us who you are. Here's a form, fill it out, and we'll consider you for this trip into the Amazon. And as part of the application, we kind of, we put out a lot of disclaimers. It was like, and I think I've mentioned this in the book. It's just like the applicant, this call for applicants is like, by the way, we're going into the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. It's going to be, 3,000 miles away from here, probably most likely from where you live, at least 1,000 miles away from a modern hospital. There's going to be poisonous snakes. There's going to be poisonous spiders. You're going to be living out in the middle of nature in your own hut, with no one around you for 30 days. So just know that before you apply. So you don't waste your time or our time. So anyway, the next day we had 400 applications. And this was insane. First of all, it was humbling to get 400 applications. But then when you read the applications, these people were for real. They were people who were desperate, very desperate for some kind of a solution. It wasn't just like, there were a few people who you could tell were not really, needing it that much. They just wanted to go on an adventure. But for the most part, I'd say at least 80% of them were people who were suffering, who were at their wits' end, who had tried everything, not just natural, but all kinds of modern approaches as well. So it was very hard, in fact, agonizing to whittle that 400 down to 8, which took us, I think 4 weeks to do. We had this thing called the wall, the entire wall of our apartment was just covered in these pictures of people with like different, like we had a committee of 5 people who were voting on each one. So color coded, like people making cases for or against certain people. Ultimately, we kind of whittled it down to 8. What we did to whittle it down to 8 was put out one more, communication saying, you need to understand, like, this is dangerous. Like, you're going to be in a place, you're going to be working with in ceremonies. These ceremonies are not voluntary. If you're coming down, then you need to do what the shamans say. There's going to be these ceremonies that, and some will be psychedelic in nature. A lot of them will be most of them will be intended to push you to your limits, to get into the spiritual underpinnings of what you're suffering from, while they're also treating the physical with the 65,000 plus species of plants that exist down there. So that actually cut it down. I underlined like the poisonous snakes a little bit, and that cut it down to like maybe in half again. But then that still was 200 people. We needed to whittle down to 8, and that was a process. But we got our 8, and then we headed down. I mean, then there was a lot more planning, but ultimately then we headed down.
Now, had you met, is it Roman Harris? Had you met Roman beforehand and gone on your journeys beforehand, before you decided I'm willing to go down this rabbit hole?
Yes. Before I decided I was willing to go down, yes, we had started going down to the jungle at least a year and a half before we started reaching out to patients, reaching out to prospective, participants. And that was a crazy little bout of synchronicity. You steer, man. I go off on tangents here, but that was a crazy bout of synchronicity in and of itself. Like I, was looking for different shaman, and there was a point in time where we were a little bit disillusioned by some that we had been meeting with and beginning to communicate with, and I was living in Park Slope, Brooklyn, going back to one of the words you threw out at the beginning of this conversation at the time. And I was with my lovely now wife, Michelle, at that point. And we were we were looking for the right person. And so this in like a week and a half period, I had my friend Mark call me from Denver. And he said, "Hey, I know you're making this movie. I think there's a guy who comes through here. He's from Peru. He comes through here once a year. I don't know his name. I can't remember what it was, but just next time he comes through, I'll let you know." And then my friend Pete, his girlfriend, a girl he started dating in California, had been working with this person down in Peru, and told him that he should tell me, because she had heard about this thing we were making, that I should talk to this guy. His name was Roman. And then I looked at my computer as I was talking to Pete, and there was like this late night like research I had been doing, probably 3 a.m. And I had found this image of this guy in the middle of the jungle, on some random nondescript, very early 1990s looking website with just a snapshot of this guy. And underneath it said Roman Hannes. I'm like, wait a second, is his name Roman Hannes? And he asked his girlfriend, and it was the same person. That's really interesting that he's already up on my screen. And then I called up my buddy Mark, and I was like, "Mark, do you know a guy named Roman Hannes?" He's like, "That's the guy I'm telling you about." I'm like, "All right,
Ta-da.
I need to meet this person." And then he just so happened to be giving a talk that week in Brighton Beach, which is a place out in Brooklyn. In the outskirts of the guy. I believe, I don't want to say this, I think it's a Russian neighborhood, predominantly Russian neighborhood. And he was giving a talk at a little yoga center out there, yoga studio out there. And I went out, and that's when I met Roman. And that's when ultimately he invited me to come to a ceremony, which would be my very first ayahuasca ceremony.
And what was that like? And we can swap story, and I certainly would never glorify it.
Oh my gosh.
What was it like for you? And what did you have that realization at some point? Was there one moment of clarity where you're like, I have been here, I have seen this, now I get it, Ness?
Okay. Going into that ceremony, even though ayahuasca is known as the vine of death, and you hear about all the stuff you do. I mean, obviously I did tons of research on it. we were considering, heavily considering going down to the Amazon to have this entire retreat. So I was very, very familiar with all the documentation on it. Even though Aya means soul, spirit, or possibly death, if you want to look at it that way. And Huasca means rope or vine. That's basically ayahuasca. Built into the actual word is that vine of death. I somehow walked into that ceremony feeling I didn't walk in with swagger, but I walked in feeling like I'd be okay, because I had experienced a lot of stuff. I'd seen a lot of terrible things. I had worked with psilocybin and other psychedelics in college long before. So I was like, I kind of get these realms. I kind of understand what I'm getting into. But it was absolutely nothing like anything I'd ever experienced. It was nothing like that. Yes, it could be it could be classified as a drug. It could be classified as a psychedelic, I guess. I think it's a very gross, generalization to kind of put all these plants into that one category, because they're so different. It was such a hard night. It was the hardest night of my life. It still is the hardest night I've ever had. That first journey. And it was interesting when I sat down in the ceremony, and this is all in my book. But when I sat down in the ceremony, I'm like, Roman announces. Well, first of all, he announces that this is a very advanced group, and I'm like, okay. And, I'm not going to walk away. I'm trying to get in. This is me on the outside still of all this stuff. I'm trying to get in. I got an opportunity. He basically, at the end of this teaching, I walk up to him, we talk, and he gets enough of a good vibe from me. And I know one or two people that he knows that he's willing to give me this kind of in. But of course, and this I find in the shamanic world happens quite a bit. It's almost like, it's not humorous. It's not done to entertain, I guess, the shaman, but it's a lot of times there's this, you want in? Okay. I'm going to give you a really, 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 really hard experience to see if I could shake you off like the flea you might be. You know what I mean?
Oh, I do know what you
mean. So he's sitting there. We're all crammed into this tiny little room. It's this beautiful, beautiful house that this thing's happening at. And he chooses the smallest, tiniest little, I think it was like what was maybe a nursery in this house, to have us all gathered in. So I can't tell you where this happened, where this transpired, but I will tell you that it was not deep in the jungles of Peru. It was in a house. It was in a very normal looking modern house, and we were in a nursery that was cleared out to fit the 20 of us, like shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, sitting against the hard wall. Just as we were about to go into ceremony, he announces that this is a very advanced group. And because it's a very advanced group, we're not only going to be having the sacrament of the cup of ayahuasca, but there's another surprise he has for us. So I'm like, okay, what? Okay. So I'm hoping that it's something that's going to be fun. It's always going to make something that only advanced people get to do, because they just are they're there enough that they don't need to necessarily do the terrible stuff. But so we take our first, everyone goes up in the ceremony, and he says a prayer. There's a few things that we could go into, but it would take a long time. But he says a prayer, says an Icaro, which is it's a song. It's sort of a prayer song that's sung down in the jungle. And then we all go up and start taking, everyone starts taking a cup one by one, which takes a while because there's a whole blessing and a thing that goes along with it. And I remember drinking my cup, and it tasted god awful. It turned apricot juice and bile combined into something. And I just swallowed it down, tried to keep it down, went back and sat down, and then everyone sort of had their experience of drinking it. And then he announces that, for his surprise, this is going to be something that he calls candy. And he's like, as traveling, through with all of this, there's after a while, 2 or 3 months traveling, there's this sediment that'll start forming on the bottom of these bottles. We keep that, and we call it candy. It's extremely potent. And if you guys would like, because you're an advanced group, you can come up here and have a spoonful. And so I'm waiting for only half the people to want to go up and get it, but everybody wants to get it. So I'm not going to be the guy who stands out as not wanting to do the thing. It's kind of, So I go up and I take a spoonful of this like toffee type stuff that you have to kind of literally like just scrape off the spoon with your teeth, and it just goes kerplunk in my stomach, and I sit back down, and then the ceremony officially begins. Candles get blown out. He sings the Nikaro, and when it came on, it was something that I thought I could figure this out. I figured it would just be like anything coming on, and a combination of one of these out of body experiences with one of these kind of tapestries and moving faces, and maybe a little bit of psilocybin mushrooms thrown in. That was kind of what I thought it would be. Like I could figure this out. It was not that. It was nothing like that, and it never has been ever since. I've never had a ceremony that was anything like anything I've ever tried before, like any kind of a quote unquote drug I've ever experienced before in my life. It was me dissolving into the floor, holding on, for trying to do anything I possibly could to hold on to this reality. And it was really interesting because as it happened, before it even reached me, I saw, I was at 6 o'clock, at 1 o'clock around the circle, I started seeing people, about 30 minutes after we drank, started seeing people start nodding, and start seeing the people start just kind of going into this new experience of this reality. And it just kind of came around like a wave, like in an arena. Somebody starts a wave, it just goes around the circle. And when it hit me, it was just everything. It went from me being okay to me being dissolving into sand on the floor. And it was not like this peaceful experience. It was an absolute horrific, catastrophic, traumatic, crazy, unbelievable experience of this world dissolving and me falling through the floor into a perpetual abyss of darkness and fear. And it was there where I started realizing how much I hated myself. Actually, was kind of the ultimate, learning happened way later, but to kind of, jump into the one of the ultimate lessons of the night was I was in this fear and I thought I was dead. I was screaming at myself and telling myself how stupid I was to have tried this. And, and I couldn't feel anything. All the words that I had been sort of using, all the negative self-talk that I never realized was kind of, ticking behind my eyelids, on that, that ticker tape of language we use that oftentimes imprisons us. In fact, it always imprisons us. And you realize that very much so when you start going into these ceremonies. You realize just how negative, just how powerful language is. Sometimes if you're in a good place, you can realize just how powerful the positive language that you have for yourself is, and just how powerful the silence is. Silence really becomes the most powerful thing. But anyway, I started realizing all these things. I started screaming at myself. I started seeing all kinds of terrible things. I started seeing all kinds of images from my past, and all kinds of other entities and things that I was just absolutely afraid of. And it was epic. It was crazy. It was a feeling of being dead, but also being alive enough to feel fear and feel shame.
Ow.
So go out and try it, everybody.
No, as I was saying before the show, and I'll give the caveat, because I've been down this rabbit hole before, I put it in as recreational as driving, we'll call it a good size SUV over your foot, and then parking it there to enjoy the ride.
It's so good. It's so good. Now, I got to say, before we get into the next bit here, sometimes it can be a really cathartic experience. That's the roulette wheel of, the ayahuasca roulette wheel. You can have an experience. The next experience, I was so afraid to get into so let me just say that that was the first 2 hours of that experience. It turned into once I started. So what happened, and I'll just tell it real quick. I'm in the middle of this thing for about 2 hours. I'm maybe it might have been an hour and a half. I'm in the middle of this place. It's not a good place. And I think I'm dead, or at least dying. And on top of all that, there's all this negative self-talk and all this fear of this crazy stuff, this swirl, this hornet's nest of thought and sound. And if the sound I'm hearing is not what's coming out of Roman's mouth when he's singing the Ikaros, we're hearing all kinds of craziness, seeing all kinds of ridiculousness, and I can't feel my body. And then I started feeling, all of a sudden, impossibly, this pain. I could feel pain in my body, and that pain brought me back into my body. And I snapped my eyes awake. Snapped my eyes. I was awake. I snapped my eyes open, and I look in the darkness. It's not darkness. It's a crazy, whirling, crazy, just explosion of things happening. But I do see that when I look down, and my foot is glowing. And I look down and I say to myself, my foot is glowing. And that's the first neutral thought I've said probably for about an hour. And once I say my foot is glowing, everything sort of quiets down. Like the crazy hornet's nest just kind of stops for a second, and I'm definitely still disoriented, but now it feels much more like I understand who I am. I understand what I'm doing. I understand what's going on in the room. It is intense, but I understand where I am now. I'm not dissolved anymore. I'm somehow sort of materialized back in my body, and I'm looking down at my foot. So the first neutral thought was my foot hurts. My foot's glowing and my foot hurts. That was like a crazy epiphany. And I was like, and then my hands just started moving my foot, and my foot was glowing. It was glowing blue. I put my hands on my foot, and then like somehow this white energy goes down my hands into my foot. My foot stops hurting, and then I'm like, my foot doesn't hurt anymore. And like then I said to myself, I think you got this. I think you figured it out. And then with that thought, all of a sudden I was back in the abyss. It dissolved me again. Like that was just a negative of a weird ego thought that triggered things that just absolutely, there's no room for ego in this situation, at least in my experience. There's no room for you to be you. There's no room for you to try to think you know anything. There's no room for control. If you think you're going to have any control over what happens as opposed to just dancing with it, then you're going to have a very hard night. So that just tossed me into the abyss for another 10 minutes. And then I started learning, like, oh, it must have been because of that. And then I started quieting my brain down, like started learning how to like quiet it down. The more you can get quiet and just experience, the more you can, you learn with it basically heightens everything. It intensifies everything. So if you have any negative thoughts or any negative patterning, it's going to show you that stuff right away. That's going to be the first 2 hours for you, is all that stuff that you've been doing that you're not aware that you're doing. Is the first 2 hours. And if you can learn the lessons, then you start going into this next crazy, ethereal, amazing situation. And now this is different for everybody. This is my experience. That's how my ayahuasca experiences always are.
So, and my experiences were kind of flip side of the same coin, which was I'd get the kind and gentle for the first half. I call them acts. So I got kind and gentle in act number 1. And then the shaman would go, do you want to go deeper? If so, here's another cup, or you can choose to stop now. And once I get that next cup, it is, all right, you think you got this one handled. It's our turn now. But she's an amazing teacher if you can relax into it. And my last experience was horrific. It was absolutely an infinite number of stations tuned in at the same time, overflow, drinking from every fire hose imaginable. And when it ended, and all of the dust settles, you're you, but you're different.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, wow, that was the most horrific, I can, at least speaking for myself, one of the most horrific experiences of my life. And how profound and incredible, and how much of a shift and how positive that was for me.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Do you feel like it's stuck with you, like a lot of the lessons that you learned?
Yes, absolutely. There is it Graham Hancock, or was it Stuart Weil? I believe it's Graham Hancock, who talks about getting a tune-up every once in a while. And I can absolutely see, because it's a tuning fork, and wanting to get attuned to that. But I think Grandmother Ayahuasca, when you go down that rabbit hole, you can get lost in this world afterwards, but you are no longer of this world. You know there's something more. You can't forget it, like an NDE. It is so profound, you can't unerase those memories. And so the current paradigm, like you said, the you that you think you are, that's dismembered, and you will no longer fully get into that ego trap of, I am me, this is all there is, and this is life or death, because life or death has a different meaning to it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I used to say that to my friends. They would be like, what's it like? And I would call it like an intentional near-death experience. That's what it is. because if you get the right dose, or if some people have a couple times and they won't feel it. It takes a few people, certain people, it takes like 3 or 4 times before they actually have the experience. But once you have the experience, it doesn't feel like you're here anymore, and there's all the fear that goes along with it. You start realizing how much you actually are clinging to this physical incarnation. You don't think you are. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm not afraid of death. Let's just put that to the test. Maybe you're not. But I mean, I didn't think I was either. I had done a lot of crazy stuff before I had ever worked with ayahuasca. I had done stuff that put my life in danger. My friends will tell you about that. But I never felt like I was afraid of death on this plane in the way that it meant, and what that meant, in terms of like being heroic or being like, a risk taker. I wasn't. But when it comes down to sitting there in a dark room and watching as everything that you think you are is taken away, and sitting there and realizing what there is left after that's gone, that's a much different proposition for sure. And what I was just going to say, I think that when we took our patients down to the jungle, and the reason why this is sort of like the baseline, everybody does an ayahuasca ceremony every week, as part of this. Now there's a ton of other herbs they take, as we talk about, the Amazon's Amazon's got 65,000 plus. It's actually much more than that. I'm hearing now. When we put the movie out, it was like 65,000. And now my ethnobotanist friends are all saying it's far more than that now. Even though the jungle is being burned down as we speak, they're still discovering even more species of plants. But they were working with a bunch of these different plants. There's incredible healing plants that these patients were exposed to that were not psychedelic in any way. But the shamans, they use this as a way to clear out all the stagnation, all of the negative beliefs, all the patterning, all the stress, and just that calcification that you have within your mind and within your spirit. They feel like that's just as or more important than doing the rest of it. So that their idea is to do that so that you're more open to the subtle plants. If you come down there and just kind of, you're still thinking about all of your problems and you're still wrapped up in your story, and you bring your devices down, which aren't not allowed, and you try to and you try to keep yourself attached to your old reality. They don't think that any of that's going to work, and I tend to agree with that from what I've seen. But ayahuasca helps clear the slate. That's what they call it. We want to start with a blank slate with you. We don't want to have to try to work through all of your drama. We want to start off with a few ceremonies just to clean the slate so we can start fresh. So
it's beautiful. It's profound. Let's talk real briefly, because I don't want to give away the whole book and the documentary, but let's talk about you brought 8 people down. They all had profound, life-changing experiences, at least on some level. What were some of the results that you experienced that you'd be all right sharing?
One of the most profound results that I would feel okay with sharing, because it doesn't give away a ton of plot. It gives away a little bit of plot, but it's okay, is our Parkinson's patient, Nicola. She came down and she had such severe Parkinson's that she couldn't walk on her own. She had to, I'm trying to remember, she had a wheelchair. We had a wheelchair for her. We might have had some kind of a rugged wheelchair to bring her out to her hut. Either that or a walker with a lot of assistance out to her hut. And we worked with a couple different herbs and a couple different other types of Amazonian energy type therapies to begin with, and they were working. They just weren't working fast enough. So they were it'd be the kind of thing where that might help over the course of a year. But she wanted results now, and it was for personal reasons. She was about to lose custody of her children because she couldn't perform the daily activities that you need to perform as a mother. So we started, one of the shamans, Habin, every shaman has sort of their own specialization. So, every shaman has their own type of illness or malady that they are really good at. Everyone knows they're good at treating. And one of his was Parkinson's and neurological disorders. So he one day comes out to the hut. We were with him. I think we were filming the whole thing. I make documentaries, by the way, everyone, if you haven't heard, if I haven't said that enough times, but uh,
Love it.
so so we were out with Habib, and he's like, well, there's one plant that we can try. It works really well, but it's really dangerous. It's called Toe. It's all the scientific name for it is Brugmansia grandiflora. It's the relative of Datura. And if you've read any Castaneda or looked into Hindu herbalism, Hindu mysticism, Datura is a big flower for them. It's a serious psychedelic. Where ayahuasca would be looked at as a teacher plant, which is hard for me to believe because it seems like it's the most intense thing you could ever do. And when you're in it, the interesting thing is there's always a way out. As lost as you can get on ayahuasca, and I've seen people get really lost, there's always a way out, and everyone always comes back. And there might be a little more integration that has to happen, maybe an extra day or two for people to kind of like really process it. But there's always a way out. There's always a guide. You say grandmother ayahuasca. I say grandmother ayahuasca. There's a reason for that, because once you get to that place with ayahuasca, there is a female energy. It could sometimes even be presented as literally grandma walking up to you and sitting next to you for the rest of the night and talking to you and giving you bits of wisdom about your life that and your ancestry and all kinds of amazing, beautiful things. There's a guide built into those plants. They're called teacher plants. There's a bunch of them. Toe and Datura are power plants. They're looked at as plants that are to be used by only if it's absolutely necessary, and always with the oversight or with the guidance of a very experienced shaman. Well, Toe is one of those. It can kill you. It can make you go blind. It can make you go crazy. And so we knew that. He told us that, and Nicola still wanted to do it. He was like, and he told Nicola about his other Parkinson's patients that he had worked with it, used it with, and how much it had helped them. And so for 2 days they worked with Datura, and it was like it had to be done without anyone around. So we couldn't even film it. That was just them in her hut. Every patient is in the middle of is in a hut that's tucked away in the middle of the jungle, completely secluded away from everybody else. So just them two in her hut for 2 days. So all I know is that at the end of the second day, when we were allowed to go see Nicola, she stood up out of bed, and to our surprise, she had this extremely elegant English accent, kind of like trying to think of a really elegant female lead, who's just got this extremely just amazing English accent. And none of us had we didn't know she had one, because her jaw was so clenched and her physique was so just tremory and just tight that she could barely get words out. So she had this elegant English accent. She made some kind of a funny joke, and we all were laughing. We all laughed, but it was just shocked. She walked out of her house, out of her hut. She hadn't walked before. She was pretty much being helped around anything that had to happen. If she had to get out of bed, somebody had to go out. We had a couple different amazing attendants who helped us with patient care. That she had to be helped out of bed and helped over to her stool and sit down and helped back up again. Well, she stood up, walked out, and started jumping, started doing these jumps. And that's actually in the movie. We actually have pictures of that with Roman. Roman's just sitting there with her and they're jumping, and then she's like, "I'm gonna go for a walk," and she just took off down the trail with one of our other patients who had so well overcome her IBS and the other maladies that she had, that she was now sort of helping us toward the tail end of the retreat with some of the other patients. She really wanted to help one of our patient, Gretchen, our participant Gretchen. She was so she was fit as a fiddle, I guess is what you'd call it. And at that point, she wanted to help us. So she was walking. She would just go on walks with Nicola. So that was a really crazy transformation. She was working with a couple plants. One of them is also called Chirisanengo, which from an energy healing perspective is really fascinating, because it's called Chirisanengo. Also, it means 1,000. It's also called 1,000 needles, because you take this plant and it feels like there's thousands of cold needles being pricked into your skin at once, kind of like acupuncture. So that was also helping her. But Toe was by far the thing for her. So that was an amazing transformation that happened down in the jungle. I thought I'd share it because you asked.
Thank you. Woohoo! So you had people go down there who had cancer, who had IBS, who had Crohn's, who had Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm. Yep, diabetes, drug addiction, depression. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So a few last questions on this, and then I'm going to urge everybody to get the book and to find out more. So if people are interested in going down this rabbit hole, how in the world does one start to find a shaman and somebody who is trustworthy?
That's a really good question. So I'm a little bit mixed on that. I feel like these days I'm advising people to stay and do the work at home and try to find the ways of going into themselves. If you look at an ayahuasca ceremony, and it's so fun to be talking with you, because on these interviews, I don't think I've ever been in an interview where the other person was, experienced with ayahuasca. So it's beautiful to be able to not try to explain to you this thing. So you get it. Like an ayahuasca ritual is you're stepping into voluntary intensity. Mm-hmm. There's many other rituals that are like that that do not require the use of a psychoactive compound. I work with sweat lodge a lot. It's my harshest medicine. It's honestly the only thing I could say that I probably would least rather do than drink grandma. Even though every time I drink grandma mid ceremony after I've gotten through my stuff, she's always like, "Baby, why are you always so afraid of me? We always get to have this time together. Once you get past the stuff, I help you clear the stuff, and we get to hang out." Well, the only thing I would rather not do as much as ayahuasca is sweat lodge, because it brings up the same.
Sweat lodge is where I started. That was the start of my journey down on the Navajo reservation a long, long time ago. Exhausting, to say the least.
And I mean, for me, I have a sensitivity to heat. I run hot, but I think also working with real traditional sweat lodges, as you have, the last one I was in was a Lakota sweat lodge in Wisconsin, and it was tiny. It was like a bunch of us huddled into this tiny little thing with the huge flaps on top of it. It was complete pitch black, and it was the hottest place I've ever been in. And it triggered me in so many ways that only like ayahuasca could. And there's a couple other things that I do that are kind of like that. What I'm trying to get at is, you don't necessarily need to go down and experience ayahuasca to start working with the things that we're talking about. We're talking about stepping into voluntary intensity. We're talking about learning how to be comfortable in discomfort. So there's all kinds of opportunity for that in your life right now. I look at it as, the little bit of wisdom that I always operate by is that everything is medicine. Yes. And you can look at everything that happens in your life as either medicine or poison. It's up to you. And so if you do that, then every little inconvenience, every little bit of fear, if you have to go talk to your boss today and you're afraid of, you're concerned about it, we've all been in that situation, that's medicine. You could look at it as, you could be stressed out about it all day and get your cortisol up and do all kinds of terrible things to yourself. Or you can say, this is the unknown. I don't know what he or she's going to say. I don't know what is going to transpire in there. I don't know. But I'm stepping into the unknown, and I choose to be comfortable with that decision, and I'm going to breathe through it, and I'm going to be in that situation that I might not even perform as well as I thought I would. That's going to be an amazing opportunity for self-forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Like, there's all kinds of opportunity for us to be in these spaces in our daily life. So I think that, it's something that I talk about a lot in the book too, but I don't want to skirt the question. But I mean, the idea of seeking out shamans and finding that one guy who's going to show you the way and take care of all your problems, it's a myth. It's just a myth. It's an illusion. It's sort of escapist, because you're trying to get away from your life to go have the experience and then come back to your life as like, it's like the Odyssey. It's like the return of the prodigal son, the return of the prodigal daughter. I've gone, I've learned everyone, I'm back, and I'm whole. That's like, we're gonna have new stuff trigger us all the time. There's not ever gonna be a happily ever after. It's gonna be it could be a happily ever now. But it's not going to be a happily ever after unless you're willing to kind of be in the moment and start understanding the teachings and the information that's coming at you all the time, and be with it, sit in it.
Thank you. And it brings us, segueing from there as we start to wind this down, is you ask Roman while you're down there, you're going, this is it. This is where I want to be. This is where I maybe even want to bring my family. And he's saying, bring this back to where you're at. That's the work.
Yeah, that is. It's the work. It's hard. It's something they call the way of being down there. Now, there's a lot of connections, and I'm sure you've drawn these conclusions as well in your work with shamanism. But there's so many similarities across all religions. I particularly right now for me, I'm seeing so much crossover with Buddhism. And also, and very interestingly, shamanism, the term shaman comes from a region in Siberia that is very close to a place that might be considered the birthplace of Buddhism. So I think that there's a lot of indigenous roots in basically all these religions. But what it comes down to is this way of being. And I mean, you can look at it as being in the now, being in full connection with everything around you. One spirit consciousness. There's all kinds of ways to look at it. Down there, it's called the way of being. At least in the lineages that I find myself, swimming in. And it's easy to be in the way of being when you're down in the middle of nowhere, far away from your problems, even if it's a harsh situation. I mean, I could be in a harsh territory in Honduras, which I have been, where it's like, oh wow, this is like serious. We're here to film some indigenous folks, but there's drug cartel all over the place. Still kind of in the now because this is crazy stuff. But I mean, I don't have to deal with like my family. I don't have to deal with like all the patterning and all the triggers that go on, with people who've known you your whole life and who might be perfect mirrors for you. So being here in the now and being in this way of being, this way of walking through the world in full connectivity with what's going on around you right then. So every bit of information that's crossing your path or swirling around you can actually be noticed and considered. That's something that is at the heart of a lot of this work in the shamanic outback of the Amazon. And it's very hard to bring it back here into the modern world. So for me, there's been plenty of times when I've considered moving my entire family down to the Sacred Valley, but it just feels like that's saving myself and not really allowing it actually sounds a little bit ego driven, but I feel like I want to bring my family into this. I want to bring community into this. And also at the same time, the best medicine for me is being around them because they're the ones who can trigger me the most. So, there's this, who wrote this book? I think Sebastian Junger wrote a book all about tribe and about how, we have this tendency to like ship our elders off away from our family and to have this latchkey situation for our children. So no one's ever really looking at or interacting with each other on a regular basis, which I think is something that we're trying very hard in my family to remedy. You getting the medicine of interaction with everyone around you, and especially your loved ones who when they're about to check off the planet, you're going to be happy you did, but in the meantime, they're going to be your best medicine, your best mirrors. So doing this work at home and bringing this way of being into your house and trying to sit with it and forgiving yourself because you're not going to be able to hang on. You're going to get knocked off the whatever you want to call it, the unicycle a couple times, but you just gotta learn how to be okay with that part of it. Every time you get to hold on to it longer and longer, and you get to become more elastic in stressful situations, which I'm finding is really fun to realize. It's like, whoa, that would normally really piss me off. I'm fine. Okay, nothing hurt. So I mean, I think that a lot of this should be done. I think this work is intended to be done in tribe. And for me, I'm a big advocate of doing it with your tribe in your local area.
Woohoo! So what one homework assignment would you give people today to take action on themselves?
Ooh, I've got this, if you want me to. I know you sometimes close these things out with a guided meditation. I've got this list of 10 medicine questions that I think they're particularly potent, and they're good ways at kind of getting into and around and behind some things that might be bothering you, or it's a good way of bringing things up that might be holding you back.
Excellent. Let's do that. Before we do that, tell us, where can people go to find your beautiful book, The Sacred Science, and to find out more?
Thank you. So they can go, if you want to take this ride with us, that's the new book, just came out, and you can get it at thesacredscience.com/new book. That'll take you to a page where you can not only get the book, but you'll also get access to a bunch of bonuses that we are making available for you right now. Again, that's thesacredscience.com/new book, and it kind of goes into a lot of what we've been talking about and gives you some very actionable items that you can put to use in your life right now.
Fantastic. And then we'll wrap things up with these 10 questions here. Would you say River is one of your greatest teachers?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I would. My 5.5-year-old son, River, is one of my greatest teachers. And I will just say real quickly, when I told the shamans down in the jungle that Michelle was pregnant, they were like, oh my gosh, They're like, you think that ayahuasca is a strong medicine. You think grandma is a strong medicine. This is the only medicine that we know of that's stronger is raising a child. So good luck on that. And so, and it proved out to be by far, sweat lodges. Sweat lodges and ayahuasca are one type of medicine, raising a young being, and all the things that come up for you when you realize that you're not necessarily as good of a parent or as perfect of a human being as you thought you'd be in that environment is just perfect opportunity for deeper work. So yeah.
I'd go woohoo, but that's a dangerous woohoo. Woohoo.
Do you want me to do these 10 medicine questions?
Yes, if you don't mind. That would be a perfect way to close things down today.
Okay. So they start pretty simple and they might get a little bit more intense. We'll see. So the first medicine question that I have, and these are just mine. This is not, I'm not representing any lineage here. These are things that I just use on my own to get myself to a place of integrity and true connection to what's going on within me. Question number 1. Is there any tension? I'm reading off of a thing here.
Perfect.
Is there any tension or pain in your body right now? If you could give it a name, what would you call this sensation? Goes back to what we were just talking about with the EFT earlier on. Mm-hmm. Question number 2. What is the one thing your body needs right now that you haven't been giving it? Question number 3. What is preventing you from being peaceful or happy right now in this moment? If it's something material, what feeling or relief would that material thing provide you? Question number 4. When was the last time you did something that put you outside your comfort zone? Question number 5. This is maybe my favorite one, and we could talk about this one for hours, but we're not going to. Question number 5. What is the one difficult conversation that you know you need to have with a friend, colleague, or family member? That one's really important to me because I feel like there's always conversations that we should be having that we're not having. I just feel like I have a lot of hard conversations, and there's always just the next one that's just waiting. And I'm like, oh, God, there it is. And when you have it, it just changes something. It changes something in you, it changes something in them, and it changes something in this mutual exchange. Question number 6. What is the one difficult conversation that you've been putting off having with yourself?
Huge.
Question number 7. What was the last white lie you told? Who did you tell it to? Why? What would have happened if you told the truth? I told a lot of lies when I was younger, so that's particularly relevant to me. And if that question triggers someone who's listening right now, there's a guy named Gary King whose work you should check out, who's all about integrity and truth. Question number 8. Is there a person in your life who you haven't fully forgiven? How did they wrong you? What is stopping you from forgiving them now? Question number 9. Years from now, when you're breathing your final breaths, what advice would you give the now you? Question number 10. And this one might sound simple, but it's been contemplated by great minds for thousands of years. Ask yourself, who am I? Who is seeing through these eyes? Who is hearing through these ears?
Woohoo! Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Nick. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's been an honor to be here. This has been a lot of fun.
It so goes both ways. It so goes both ways. And we could certainly keep going for hour after hour after hour. On that note, I'm almost afraid to ask before I let you go, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
Well, One of the most impactful things I ever heard from one of the shamans that I work with down in the jungle was this. He said, the biggest misconception that you Westerners have about us shamans is that we heal our participants, our patients. But we shamans don't heal our patients. We simply remove the blocks that are preventing our patients from healing themselves.
Woohoo!
So that's it.
Perfect. Grand slam. Out of here. So thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. I hope we can do it again.
Awesome. Would love to. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the sacred science, and begin connecting with your inner wisdom today, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Nick.
Absolutely. This was awesome.
I'm so glad you had fun.
This is so fun. Why can't everyone be as fun as you?
I'd be out of a job.
Seriously, I'm usually one of us to try to bring some energy to the thing, but this was great.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirernationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!